BBC. From Global, leading Britain's conversation, The Nigel Farage Show.
Mr. Nigel Farage.
Thank you, Donald, and good evening, everybody. What a remarkable day today has been. Good evening, everybody. What a remarkable day today has been in Conservative politics. Eurosceptics battling against Europhiles. That division, that fault line that has been there in the party, actually, since the early 1970s, has emerged today, I think, in a more vivid form than perhaps we've ever seen it before. So the day starts with an article on Brexit Central by one Jacob Rees-Mogg, MP for North East Somerset. And Jacob tells us in Brexit Central today that he has written a letter that has been sent to every single Conservative association across the country. In it, he says that Theresa May must believe in Britain, which interestingly was my campaign slogan for the general election of 2015, and chuck Chequers. He then, point by point, deconstructs the 7th of July Chequers proposal from Mrs May, saying that effectively free movement will continue, the European Court will continue to have a say, we will go on paying large sums of money. Jacob, as we know, very much a committed Eurosceptic, but always seen to be a gentleman who would continue to play within the rules of the party. I thought for the day to begin with Jacob putting this out and sending this letter showed that Rees-Mogg, gentle though he may look on the outside, has now effectively gone to war over Brexit. There was more to come from Jacob later in the day, but we'll wait a moment for that. And all of this on the day when 25 documents were being released by the government covering what would happen in the event of a no deal on Brexit. And the government are telling us that the cost of card payments between us and the EU would likely go up, that Britons living elsewhere in Europe might lose access to their pensions, many other problems that may emerge from Brexit, including, by the way, if you are a smoker, the warnings on your cigarettes would have to change because they're all under EU copyright. But at the same time as saying one or two negative things, Dominic Raab, the Brexit secretary, did lay out what might be the positives if we had no deal. Here he was.
Brexit presents very specific challenges, but the technical notices out today will explain what the sector needs to do and the support we'll be providing to help reassure them and make sure that we can provide all of the guarantees. What we're going to do today is be honest about the risks, inform those affected, some guidance, and I hope with sector, whether they're individual citizens, whether they're businesses or charities, and give some guidance, and I hope with that some reassurance and also critically some context about the risk. This is going to be a series of notices. We're going to be publishing 25 today. That is around roughly a third of the total number. And what we'll seek to do is provide reassurance across the whole gamut. The 25 today will cover things ranging as widely as the details of the new nuclear safeguards regime we'll have in place through the Office of Nuclear Regulation. There'll be some information about how we'll deal with the state aid rules in the UK and how the institutional capacity will be there.
So lots of technical detail, everything from the warnings on cigarette packets through to, trade, foreign aid and many other things. And he went on to say that if we did leave with no deals and be able to negotiate global trade deals. So he was explaining what some of the difficulties may be of a no-deal Brexit, but actually at the same time virtually talking up the prospects of a no-deal Brexit. This on the day when Jacob had done his best to completely sink Chequers. I find it bizarre that Dominic Raab on the 7th of July, in the wake of the Chequers deal, which remember led to the resignation of David Davis, led to the resignation, of course, of Boris Johnson and many others, that Dominic Raab, who supported the Chequers plan, is now out there today pretending, in my view, that no deal is somehow an option. I don't believe for one moment that this government, this cabinet, would ever sanction a no deal. My view is they're doing this firstly to reassure industry that at least some thought is going into it. But really they're doing it to stop a leadership challenge and to stop what they know is going to be an autumn of campaigns against the kind of Brexit this government is lining us up for. That is my view, folks, but tell me, do you think the publication of Raab's papers today suggest we're headed for a no deal? And if you think, well, actually, the government's just doing its job, call 0345 6060 973. Maybe you think, actually, the truth is we are headed for a no deal, in which case text to 84850. Or maybe, like me, you think today was a complete and utter charade from a government doing its best to keep in power. A government where they give speeches, you know, like the one that they gave at Lancaster House that reassures Eurosceptics and then do the opposite. If that's how you feel, tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC. And of course, watch us on Facebook. I'm live from a studio here in Kent and you can comment there too. Let's try Daniel in Cheltenham. Daniel, when Raab said these things today, do you begin to think a no deal is possible?
Hello, Nigel. Nice to speak with you again. Can I ask you one quick question before?
No, I'm asking you a question, Daniel.
Okay.
This is a phone-in show on LBC. We're very pleased to have you. You know, I've laid out Jacob Rees-Mogg and the Eurosceptics going really hard on Chequers. Dominic Raab, who supports Chequers, now saying there's another option. Do you actually think this government could, if Monsieur Barnier doesn't play ball, advocate a no-deal Brexit?
Well, I think this government is completely delusional. The Chequers plan has been already rejected by sorry, I forgot the name right now. By
Monsieur Barnier.
By the EU, thank you. By
lovely, charming Monsieur Barnier. Yeah.
Well, I don't see why you're saying that, like mocking him, because he's just defending EU principles as they've always done. They're not. I mean, the UK is asking for a privileged treatment, and when the rules and regulations of the single market were laid out originally by the UK as well, it was a key party in laying out these rules and regulations. So I don't understand now how come the UK can come to the EU and ask for, we want freedom of movement of goods and services, but not of people.
What you mean rather like Canada, who just signed a deal with them, Daniel?
But one thing, I mean, you're conflating a free trade deal with a completely regulatory alignment. Those are the different things. You can sign a free trade deal with the Canada style. That's, of course, on the table. The EU has never rejected it. What the EU is saying is, if you want to be a part of the single market, you're going to have to accept freedom of movement of people.
So, Daniel, you and I clearly come at this from different perspectives. But can you explain to me why the British government don't just go for a simple Canada-style free trade deal?
Well, I mean, I think that wouldn't solve your problems really, because you would still have problems in the just-in-time process. You need frictionless trade with your European partners. And
why? Why, Daniel? Why?
Well, because there are customs clearance that you will need to comply with, even if with a free trade deal. Switzerland, for instance, which is a even closer integration than a free trade deal, and the border with Switzerland is nothing but, it's not frictionless at all. You need to, and there are customs.
But what I'm asking you, Daniel, is why does trade need to be frictionless with the EU and not frictionless with the rest of the world with whom we do more business?
Well, I mean, if you agree to have a regulatory alignment with the EU, that's why
I don't.
You don't need.
But I don't.
Well, but that's why you will need the all these checks and regulations on the border that you will not need if you're part of the single market.
Right. Well, Daniel, let me just ask you. So you think, Daniel, we should stay part of a single market, yeah?
Well, absolutely. I mean,
okay.
Anything else is, if I may just ask you a very quick question.
Very quick.
Okay. Let's imagine, the UK and Ireland are already out of the EU, complete independent countries. They are negotiating a trade deal between them two. Which country would you say is more powerful in that negotiation?
Well, the United Kingdom by a country mile, Daniel.
Okay, but funny enough, Ireland has a trade deficit with the UK. So Ireland buys much more products and goods and services from the UK than it sells them.
Daniel, look, we are trading at a massive trade deficit with the European Union. The scale of the economy between Ireland and the UK is smaller. Daniel, I'm going to move on. Thank you for your call. Nice to speak to you again. I know you're a big single market supporter, but what was being suggested today by Dominic Raab is there could be a no deal. I don't believe a word of it. What does Bill in Canterbury, a new caller to this show, make of it? Bill, good evening.
Good evening. I've been reading Raab's papers with some intensity today because he mentioned that the Brexit International Trade Department expect to recruit thousands of people to ready us for the exit, which, looking at the detail, they've been trying to recruit people from the end of July. They go through 5 different stages of interview, which will finish in September. Presumably all these people will be employed, well, the conditions are that they will be employed up to 3 years, which seems to me to be an agenda that the British people are not aware of.
So, Bill, they want to string it out forever, don't they, in reality?
Well, it seems extraordinary that they've just started recruiting what Raab intends to be thousands of people as policy advisors into the civil service, and no one will actually start work until September at the earliest.
Dear, oh dear, oh dear. Bill, was Dominic Raab being disingenuous today when he suggested there might be a no-deal Brexit?
I think there's so much PR puff and irrelevance going on now, which is masquerading the fact that the people who are responsible in the party and government have just not done their homework, and they're being second-guessed and outskilled by EU negotiators.
Yeah, I think, Bill, we're losing. I agree. Thank you very much indeed. I mentioned Jacob Rees-Mogg's pretty strong overnight letter to Conservative associations saying that Chequers should be dumped and we should believe in Britain. That was as nothing to what he said later on in the day. More of that in a moment, but for now, you're listening to the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC, and it's 7:16. Well, what a confusing day. Confusing day in Conservative Party politics, unless you really understand what their agenda is. So the day begins with Jacob Rees-Mogg writing to all the associations, publishing a piece on Brexit Central, completely trashing the Chequers plan, saying it's time to chuck Chequers and we ought to believe in Britain. That on the day when 25 papers are issued by the government saying they're preparing us for a no deal, and Dominic Raab saying, whilst there may be problems, at least with a no deal, we wouldn't have to pay any more money, we could control our borders and start doing trade deals. All sounded good to me, if of course I believed a single word he was saying, which I didn't, and I've been saying that on this show for the last week. But just to show you what a mess this government and the Conservative Party is, on the very day when the Brexit minister, I mean he's the bag carrier really, but the Brexit minister puts out these papers, Philip Hammond, the Chancellor, publishes a letter to Nicky Morgan, one of the Remainers-in-Chief, where he says leaving the EU without a deal would have large fiscal consequences. He did that minutes after Raab said most people wouldn't even notice its impact. Be in no doubt, folks, be in no doubt that the vast majority of our cabinet and our government would never even consider a no-deal option. They're pushing it, in my view, as hard as they are right now because they want to stop Boris and his bid for the leadership. And if you disagree with that, call 03456060973. And if that wasn't remarkable enough, something else happened not long before we came on air. And I'm going to talk to Stephen Swinford, Deputy Political Editor at the Daily Telegraph. Stephen, good evening.
Nigel, good evening. Delighted to be on.
Now, I understand that you have had an evening conversation with the Jacob Rees-Mogg, normally the politest member of Parliament.
He's a very, very polite member of Parliament, but he also likes his biblical references, and he's got a particularly punchy one in relation to Philip Hammond.
Yeah.
I asked him about his thoughts on Philip Hammond, and he told me, as a dog returneth to his vomit, so a fool returneth to his folly, which is obviously from the Bible, and a biblical quote. But his point was that what Mr. Hammond is doing now is a reminder of why no one believes the politicised forecast of the Treasury. The Treasury is desperate to stop Brexit. Everything the Treasury does has to be read in this light.
Stephen, as somebody who watches politics and politicians full-time for a living, this is by far, is it not, the strongest thing Jacob's ever said?
Jacob has said some strong things, but comparing the Chancellor to a dog returning to its vomit is certainly the strongest thing I've heard him say about Philip Hammond.
Yeah, I mean, one sort of thinks of people who do biblical references or classical references, Enoch Powell's Roman on the banks of the River Tiber. I wonder whether Jacob will ever quite live down this comment. I mean, is it, Stephen? Is it now, hey, it's still August. We haven't even had the bank holiday. It's supposed to be the silly season. The conferences are still a month away. I mean, is it now open Tory civil war on Brexit?
It's back, and it's certainly totally open civil war. The remarkable thing about this intervention by Philip Hammond this afternoon is he appears to have done it of his own accord. I'm being told that nobody knew it was coming. Downing Street wasn't aware it was coming. Mr. Raab certainly wasn't aware it was coming as he stood there and spoke. So it's blown the government strategy today completely out of the water. And everybody is absolutely furious about it.
Is there really any prospect of this government, with this cabinet, accepting a no deal?
I think it's incredibly unlikely while Theresa May is Prime Minister. She is very, very reluctant to ever say anything like that. But Dominic Raab certainly gave it a good go today. He was saying that actually leaving without a deal is still better than staying in the European Union.
Yeah, no, that's right. I mean, they have put out the case for a no deal. He's made one or two positive sounds, but you're right, they're after a deal, almost any kind of deal. What I'm struck by with Hammond is that he's fighting hard for Chequers. Finally, Stephen, I'm hearing rumours, and I bet you are too, because he's a columnist for your newspaper, that Boris Johnson is on manoeuvres and is going to be pushing hard this autumn to get the leadership.
There is fevered speculation all around Westminster that Boris is on manoeuvres and preparing for some very weighty interventions both ahead of conference and during conference. So everybody is watching Boris. Unfortunately, this week's column in the Telegraph was very good, but it was on the subject of otters.
I read it with incredulity. Stephen, when you hear those rumours, do you believe them?
There certainly seems to be something in them. I think he's certainly preparing to, as he put it, save Brexit in the Commons. So he's certainly getting ready for something quite big, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much indeed. That was Stephen Swinford, Deputy Political Editor at the Daily Telegraph, telling us that when he spoke to Jacob Rees-Mogg earlier, he described Philip Hammond trashing the idea of a no-deal Brexit as a dog returneth to his vomit, so a fool returneth to his folly. I think Jacob Rees-Mogg is now completely out there as an open opponent of this government. Is a no-deal Brexit possible? Do these papers published today suggest that? I don't believe it. What does Carol in Folkestone think? Good evening, Carol.
Good evening, Nigel. No, I'm a bit concerned because Jacob is a real gentleman. He loves and respects his country, but I think he must be absolutely raging.
Do you know, Carol, and I won't reveal the exact words of the conversation, but I saw Jacob Rees-Mogg the week before last at Lord's Cricket. We always meet at Lord's Cricket. And I was struck that in some ways this was a very different Jacob. Jacob normally deals with everything with equanimity. He's very gentlemanly.
Oh, yes.
Carol, I think you're right. I think Chequers, and I'm not quoting him, folks, so please don't say that I am, but my impression of my cup of tea with Jacob at Lord's was that he views Chequers as a total betrayal, not just of what people voted for in Brexit, but perhaps more importantly, Carol, of what people voted for in the general election.
Can I just say to you, I listened to the farming this morning and I was absolutely horrified. Wait for this one. You heard about not having bent bananas.
Yep.
a third of British food supplies
is thrown away.
Wait, a third.
Carol, I'm sorry, but
Doesn't it look good?
if you'd listened to me on the Sunday morning show that I do for LBC as well, I did talk about that. Up to a third of our produce on 12 fruits and vegetables gets thrown away because it doesn't meet EU beauty standards. It's mad. Carol, thank you. I'm going to go to Hull now and speak to Charles. Charles, good evening.
Oh, good evening, Nigel. Thanks for letting me on and stuff. May I actually use the Bible as well on behalf of MP Hammond, our Chancellor?
Yep.
And a man's foe should be those of his own household.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yes. So that's by the by. Actually, I'm actually here to talk about.
I mean, isn't just Charles quickly?
Dare I say,
Charles quickly. Charles, hang on, whoa down there, Charles. Charles, Charles? Listen, Charles, listen. Oh, I give up with Charles. Charles, I'm pointing out that actually the truth of it is the foes are within the same household, aren't they? So you are absolutely right. The question is, which side is going to win?
You were talking over me. How dare you? How dare you?
No, Charles. I know, Charles. I was just stopping you on your first point before your main point. Now, as you refuse to answer that, I'll let you now make your own point.
Right. So many Brexiteers are talking about rhetoric. I deal in detail. There are so many people who their livelihoods. Okay, I predict that there's going to be 500,000 jobs lost in the next
And how many will die, Charles? How many will die through lack of medicines?
Oh,
million, 2 million? What do you reckon?
Pull that one. You can't pull that one.
You sound so angry, Charles. You sound almost. You're not even in control, really, are you?
And I want a job. You have everything. I want a job.
OK, well, maybe, Charles, with Brexit and Britain becoming a global trading nation, getting rid of crazy regulations, maybe there'll be more jobs for everybody.
Just supposing everything goes belly up with all the lorries tanked up all the way to the Dartford tunnel.
Yeah. Because, I mean, how on earth could lorries move? And I mean, unless we were governed by Mr. Juncker.
Poor people will get hit.
It's the poor people, Charles. It's the poor people, Charles, who through mass immigration saw their wages driven down, their access to GPs. You're very angry, aren't you? So, Charles, what should we do? Should we just fly the white flag and say to Mr. Juncker, take over the whole nation?
If the whole country goes down, if the British economy goes down the drain, you don't have anything. Do you understand economics?
I do. I think you're right, Charles. Let's fly the European Union flag on every building. Let's get rid of the Queen. Let's put Juncker in charge and abolish elections forever. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's 7:30 and time for the news with Thomas Watts. Well, they're talking today about a no-deal Brexit. I don't believe it for a moment. I think Philip Hammond has let the cat out of the bag by saying it would have catastrophic, awful consequences. And Jacob Rees-Mogg has responded in a way that we just heard from Stephen Swinford from The Telegraph. It's open civil war on Brexit in the Tory party. But you know something? One thing they're not talking about, they're just not discussing immigration. They find it too awkward. They find it too embarrassing. I, of course, have tried to talk about immigration, and I've talked about the rise in population on this show, the effect on living standards, and many of you think I'm sort of making it up. Well, I have said to you before that I thought over 2/3 of the population growth in this country was directly due to immigration and the irresponsible policies I believe we followed since the turn of the century. But don't take it from me. Let's get the absolute facts and figures. I'm going to go next to Lord Green of Deddington, and he is chairman of Migration Watch, former ambassador to Syria, former director of the Middle East in the Foreign Office, an experienced diplomat. Andrew, good evening. Are you with me?
Good evening. Yes, I am, Nigel.
Good. So, firstly, can you just explain to us how much our population has increased since the turn of the century?
Well, it's increased by about 8 million
8 million.
What we've from 2001 to let me reach for the number. 2001. The total increase was 6.6 million.
6.6 million.
6.6 million between 2001 and 2016.
Yeah.
But what we have done for the first time, I think, is to make the first proper calculation of how much of that increase was down to immigration. Now, some of that is obvious. The number of migrants is known. The number of children who came with them is known. But what nobody had calculated was how many children they had had after their arrival. Now, these children are not migrants, of course, because they were born here, but clearly they've added to our population. So when you do that proper calculation, which frankly the government could easily have done and never did, what we found was that in that 15-year period, 82% of our population increase, 82% was down to immigration. I mean, it's just astonishing.
So
And
that's
when you then
so
put
that's
that in-
that's 5.5 million roughly.
Yes, 5.4 million, exactly. What that means is that immigration is adding to our population 1 million people every 3 years.
Wow.
It is down to immigration. I mean, it's absolutely astonishing. And so, as you said at the beginning just now, it's really not possible to talk about the impact on housing or roads or schools or whatever, unless you recognise that a major cause of it, 80%, 82%, is down to immigration. And just to take one example, housing, you may know that we will have to build a new home every 5 minutes, night and day, just to house new migrants. That's the scale of it.
Can you explain to me, Lord Green, and I am completely with you on this, the impact on, and you didn't even mention traffic on the roads, because of course, you know, 2.5 million new car or more cars in the space of the last 5 years is again directly linked to the size of population. Why is mainstream politics completely in denial on this subject?
I think for a number of reasons. One is I think some people are nervous about being thought of as racist if they talk about immigration. And I think that applies quite widely in the bureaucracy at sort of working level and lower levels. They just don't like to talk about it. And I think it applies in the BBC as well, as a matter of fact. But I think beyond that, we are approaching the point where the number of voters who are immigrants or who have a family abroad who they would like to come here and so on, I think they are becoming a significant factor, or will become a significant factor, in the calculations of the two major parties.
Yeah. No, I'm sure, and particularly in urban areas, some of which on the outer edges are marginal. I'm sure that's true. Finally, Lord Green, is there any prospect of Brexit doing anything to take back control of our borders?
Yes, if we achieve a clean Brexit, certainly it would be entirely up to us to decide who we're going to have here. And what we've recommended is that we should only have people who would qualify for a work permit. That's highly skilled people. The rest should be either cut off completely or cut off over a period of time, because they don't add to our GDP per head, to our wealth per head. They add to our numbers, and that cancels out the contribution they make. So yes, it is perfectly possible to say we will only have the highly skilled.
Okay.
What we need is a government that has the balls to say it.
Right, thank you very much indeed. That was Lord Green of Deddington being very clear there that immigration has been completely out of control since the turn of the century, and that 82%, an incredible 5.4 million extra people in this country since 2001 because of immigration. You may think Lord Green is right, you may think he's wrong. Please do let me know, 84850, what you make of that. Back to our main conversation. Do you believe, with these papers being published today, the Tories are on course for a no-deal Brexit, or is the whole thing a complete and utter charade, as I believe Philip Hammond has exposed this evening? Let's ask James in Edinburgh what he makes of that.
Yes, good evening, Nigel.
Good evening.
I would like to say that both sides in these negotiations are barking up the wrong tree.
Okay.
We're in the process of ruining a relationship with all its warts and pimples, of course, and instead of trying to negotiate, and on both sides negotiate a solution for Europe as a whole. Both sides are negotiating us into a juggernaut from which the driver has leapt off, and we're heading for a cliff.
Is it possible, James? James, just quickly, is it possible? You talk about the relationship, that many UK voters have seen this as an abusive relationship.
I don't think it is. I think Britain should, from the beginning, have seen that it is no longer an empire, and we want to get that empire back, and that empire now masquerades under the name of the Commonwealth, and we are much safer for the future with the rise of Russia and China as threats to world peace and
but James,
everything we hold dear.
But James, yes. The European Union is an empire, isn't it?
No.
Yes, and I'm sorry, James. I sat next. Hang on. Give me 10 seconds, and then you say whatever you like. I sat next to Mr. Barroso, the European Commission President before Juncker. I sat not 6 feet from him when he said 6 years ago, the European Union is a new empire. They want to expand, they want to grow, they want... I mean, James, let's not pretend they want to become a global superpower.
Don't. Just because you heard Mr. Barroso say that, that's one man out of thousands of...
The boss. So the man in charge.
Nigel, you're totally intolerant. I admire you. You're very good at doing what you're doing, but you're one of these people along with a number of non-entities in this country who are leading us and Europe as a whole down to disaster.
How can non-entities lead, James?
They're not leading. The whole thing you said, your own words, you said a charade. This whole thing is a charade.
Well, look.
I think not only should we leave I think we should leave the European Union, but I think everybody else should leave it, and that we should negotiate a new European Union and make it fit to accommodate 29 rather than 6 nations, which it was built for. And
do you know what, James?
Yes.
Do you know what, James? And I mean this. If we got rid of this current, completely outdated, undemocratic, failing structure, awful structure that is there in Brussels, if we had a Europe that was based on trade, cooperation, being good neighbours with each other, having reciprocity on students and many other things, do you know what, James? I would support it 100%.
But do you not think leaving the EU is a terribly drastic way, taking a mallet to a pin of sorting a problem which basically boils down to immigration? That is the main issue.
If we are going to get, James, that cooperative Europe of neighbours that you're talking about and I'm talking about, if we're going to get that, we will not get it within the existing model. It has been designed and set up through treaties and laws to make sure that it's unreformable. We have to break the current model to have a new Europe of cooperation. James, I thank you for your call, and very interesting call. You can start a call off disagreeing with somebody and finish up actually looking to the future, agreeing, which is good, because that's called debate. Actually, in the end, it's called democracy. You're listening to The Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. It's 7:45. As the Brexit bag carrier, Secretary Dominic Raab issues 25 new papers today, preparing us for a no-Brexit deal. Is it credible that we're headed towards that deal? I don't believe it is. I think they're doing it to stop a leadership contest. That is genuinely my view. On text I get, I believe we will leave with no deal. The EU are seeking to exploit division here in an attempt to force a people's vote to keep us in. Bruce on Facebook says, you and Trump are both content on ruining this country. Your politics are forcing a no deal. Shame on you. I tell you what, Bruce matey, I'd much rather a no deal, by which I mean a WTO deal, than I would the Chequers deal, which was a total and utter surrender. No wonder Jacob and Boris are so angry. Mary says, this madness needs to stop. Why aren't we working with the EU? We need a deal. We need to access the single market and make sure we don't go bankrupt. Tina says, a negotiation is a two-way street and we won't accept what the EU has to offer. People like you, Nigel, are making the government's position virtually impossible. Tina, post-Chequers, if I'm helping to make the government's position, given they wanted to totally betray what 17.4 million people voted for in the greatest democratic exercise in history, if I'm making their position impossible, I am very, very pleased about that. Hey, what does Adam in Sheffield, a new caller to this show, make of today's Conservative Party shenanigans? Adam, hello.
Hello, Nigel. Thank you for letting me on. I think it's an absolute betrayal. The Conservatives are in mid-civil war almost. They're absolute shambles. They've got one side Remain, one side Brexit. They can't get along. They can't cooperate. They can't lead the country, essentially. They're batting heads against each other, never mind against Labour or Lib Dems, etc.
What did you make of Jacob's comments, Adam, that he made about Philip Hammond?
I'm all for Jacob. He has principles. He has principles, and those principles is what makes a leader, not what Theresa May with the Chequers deal did.
It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, he's always been so polite, Adam, Jacob, and everything he's done.
Yeah.
Overnight, he trashes Chequers in the most extraordinary way. Chuck Chequers, I quote Jacob Rees-Mogg. And then tonight, and okay, it's a biblical reference, but, talking about the Chancellor of the Exchequer as a dog returneth to his vomit. I mean, Jacob is now in full war mode, isn't he?
Yes, but I think what I've been saying essentially is, no matter what, Theresa May won't step down as leader. Nothing that happens in the Conservatives will get her to step down. The only way that will get her to step down or to Conservatives really do something opposition. And essentially, I know you were a leader of UKIP in 2016. UKIP got Brexit. We opposed Conservatives. We got rid of the votes. We made them tremble. That's the only way you're going to get them doing. Nothing. No matter how much infiltrate you do in the Conservative Party, it's not going to get her to move on a position. It's opposition votes.
Well, yeah. I mean, this is the current, and you may have seen a lot of talk about Aaron Banks himself trying to join the Conservative Party today and being rejected.
Apparently, they've stopped it. They've got rid of his membership.
But I mean, Aaron is advocating that everyone joins the Conservative Party and then we can sort it out and get rid of Mrs May. But I, like you, Adam, I think if all the Eurosceptics joined the Tory Party, they'd absolutely rub their hands with glee because there'd be no threat to them at all, would there?
No, they wouldn't. That's why. I know you've distanced yourself from UKIP a bit and you've gone away.
No. I haven't distanced myself from UKIP. I'm no longer the leader. And if you've been the pub landlord for 25 years, the last thing your successor needs is you coming in for a beer at 6 o'clock every night and criticising everything. That's the point, Adam. I still believe in what UKIP stands for as a political party. I might not agree with every current nuance of it, but I'm still behind it. Adam, I thank you. I'm going to move on. Andy says, Boris will never run for leadership. He's nothing but a coward. Andy, he should have gone for it back in July. He now seems, and I've had good information, that he's limbering up, for a big autumn campaign. The trouble is, unless there is a coronation within the Conservative Party and Mrs May's removed in October, the leadership contest would mean that actually Article 50 would need to be delayed. We would have played into Blair and Soros's hands. Boris, I think he will run for the leadership, but I think, frankly, as far as Brexit's concerned, he's left it too late. Frank says, Nigel, I hope there'll be bread on the shelves on the supermarkets post-Brexit. I'm not so sure we'll have any by the way things are going. Frank, I've been listening today, and shame on me, I wasn't listening to LBC all day. I listened to a bit of the BBC, 2 or 3 of their channels today, and the debates and conversations they were having. The idea there'll be no medicine, the idea there'll be no food, the idea catastrophe will fall upon us, seems to be based upon the idea that if we leave the European Union, they will not sell us anything. Believe me, many of the German manufacturers are already panicking about the state of these negotiations. Even if the European Union make it a little bit more difficult to get our goods into their market, please believe me, you know, the champagne makers, the car producers, the pharma companies, and everybody else will wish to continue selling their products to their biggest marketplace in Europe, to the place that they call Treasure Island. And some say, but the European Commission may step in and make it difficult. Well, frankly, if the European Commission were going to go on a mission to try and starve Britain out, a sort of modern-day style U-boat campaign, firstly, even I don't believe they're as bad a people than that. And secondly, if you believe they are, why on earth are we a member of this thing in the first place? Let's go to Reigate and speak to Colin. Colin, good evening.
Good evening, how are you?
I am, on the face of it, Colin, I'm confused. Because you get Chequers being attacked, you get, Raab saying no deal is possible, the Chancellor saying it's impossible, but actually, Colin, my view is that much of this no deal talk is a charade. My view is they want Chequers, this government, or maybe something even weaker than that.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's interesting. In terms of, goodness knows, I don't want there to be a no deal. Obviously, I think personally, I was a Remainer.
Yep.
I believe in what the EU was about initially, with regards to bringing equality to all and to try and distribute the wealth in some ways to the more wealthier, to the lesser wealthier countries within Europe, to bring a little bit more of a cohesive, the saying of the difference in money can generate extreme behaviour. And I think by distributing the wealth, and we do well as a society, as a nation, we have our downsides. But my opinion is that really we have to look upon the government and what they've done to really not help the situation. Well, on the same side of the coin, there are a lot of downsides to the EU, and I do believe that policies, if they were to change, then they would work. But the
trouble is, Colin, there's no prospect of change from the EU side, is there?
So let me ask you this then. So, question of where you believe Britain's future is. Where do you think our economy is going to be?
Well, our economy, freed of excessive red tape, free and able to make its own decisions on the world stage, can be much bigger and greater than it is today. But to get there, Colin, we need a government that believes in what they're doing. Colin, I'm going to let you go and take one last caller tonight, and that's Robert in Basildon. Robert, you have the final say this evening. Is a no deal a possibility, or are the government simply pretending?
Hi, Nigel. Firstly, allow me to thank you for coming on the show. And I think a no deal is certainly a possibility for the government, and I think a great opportunity for the UK. I think this is something we should actively go towards. Robert,
you must be wrong. I heard Sir Keir Starmer this morning saying it could be catastrophic.
Well, you see, you would have these people saying that, but I think increasingly we are finding people that are very socially conservative. They're sort of calling themselves these high Tories or high Tory gang, and they're flooding the Conservative Party. And so we're seeing this mass panic of, high-tier Conservative members that are starting to panic, and they're starting to think, oh dear, indeed that we are actually seeing we might be forced to give our hand on a hard Brexit. We might be forced to actually make the country go out with its free trade opportunities. And it scares them, I think. And I think it scares them to death of the idea of actually having real social conservatism in the Conservative Party.
But what about economic conservatism? What about our ability? I mean, there are lots of factors here. Robert, where is Mrs May going to... Robert, you've got 15 seconds to tell me. What is Mrs May going to do this autumn?
She's going to stay on, but I don't think she'll be able to stay on for more than a year. I think she'll be forced out. Definitely forced out.
Another year of Mrs May. Oh, Robert, you really, really ended this show on a low note for me. Thank you. You've been listening to the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. I'll be back on Sunday morning at 10 o'clock.